All right, well, let's jump over again to 1 Samuel chapter 18. First Samuel chapter 18. We have been traveling through 1 Samuel, looking at the life of King Saul. He was the first king of Israel. We learned about his early reign, and we learned about some of the mistakes he made and how the Bible tells us that the Lord had rejected him from being king. And a man named David has come on the scene, and he was anointed by Samuel. He defeated the giant Goliath, and he's really kind of become the main character of the story. And looking last week at the first half of chapter 18, we saw where David has kind of become entrenched as the beloved one in Israel. He's made a covenant with Jonathan, the king's son. He has gained the affection and the hearts of the people with his victories. We got to see some real human emotion last week. We got to see jealousy and anger start to creep out in Saul. It's kind of interesting how ugly those things look when you can see them in other people, right? That's a lesson for us in what it really looks like. It's hard to see it in us. Sometimes we feel like our anger or our jealousy is really, really justified, and it just doesn't sound or look as ugly as maybe when we see it in someone else. But just know that when you act on those things and when you give way and allow those kind of emotions to control you, you may not throw a spear at anyone, but we can be just as ugly when we're controlled by those kind of emotions, just like Saul was. But his jealousy has really started to creep out. When they praised David for his 10,000s, they only praised Saul for his thousands. He's made an attempt on David's life, and yet we learn that David behaved wisely, and his going out and coming in, his victories continue to further gain the hearts of Israel. We're going to keep on with chapter 18 and hopefully finish it tonight. We're going to see Saul, who's even more obsessed with David and trying to find a way to get rid of him. Now that doesn't seem like it should work, right? I mean, if you're the king of Israel and you have a captain now for your army that's courageous, that's loyal, that's brave, that behaves himself wisely, you'd think he would be the best asset that you could have in your nation. That's how jealousy works, right? That's how Saul's jealousy is going to work. Even as good a man as David is, both in his character and in his actions, Saul would rather be rid of him than have a man like that on his side. Number one, we're in chapter 18. We're going to pick up with verse 17. But number one, Saul plans a trap. Okay? Saul plans a trap. Verse number 17, it says, "And Saul said to David, Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife." Now we remember back in chapter 17 when Israel was having a problem with the giant, when they were having a problem with Goliath, and Goliath was taunting and Goliath was reproaching the nation of Israel, Saul made a promise. Part of that promise was that whoever would defeat this giant, I will give him my daughter. Right? Remember that promise all the way back then? Well, according to this verse, it seems like Saul's ready to make good on that promise. It's a good idea to keep your promises. It's not wise to rashly or quickly make promises that you don't intend to keep. I don't know that I would as quickly promise, and I'm sure my daughters would not want me to quickly promise them to someone for a small, quick gratification. But Saul did, and now it sounds like Saul's going to make true on that, and he's going to offer his daughter to David. Notice what it says here. "Her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not my hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him." Now it seemed like a good gesture at first, but that kind of quickly turns. You read the first part of that verse, And you think, it looks like maybe the Saul that tried to kill David, maybe that was just a momentary lapse, right? Maybe that was just a momentary lashing out in anger. He's ready to move past that. He's ready to let bygones be bygones, put that in the past, apologize. Hey, I lost control, flew off the handle. Sorry for trying to stick you to the wall with a spear. Here's my daughter. That was not what Saul had in his mind or his heart at all. David being offered his daughter was not out of the goodness of Saul's heart. In fact, he has a very different motive for what he is doing. And in verse number 17, you see Saul the manipulator. Now I want you to notice that in verse 17. Only be thou valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. You and I both know Saul doesn't really care about spiritual things. But he knows that David does. And he's going to take advantage of David's loyalty. He's going to take advantage of David's patriotic spirit. He knows that David is courageous. He knows that David has a heart for the Lord. And he's going to take this and he's going to use it against him. Right? These are the enemies. These are the enemies of the Lord. Right? Be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. I'm going to give you my daughter. But I want to know that you're on my side. I want to know that you're gonna fight these battles, and you're gonna fight the Lord's battles. Let me say this: we do need to be very careful. There are people in this world who are deceptive and manipulating. It's important for us, and I think about you kids. I think about our young people that we have here. It's why we re-emphasize and talk all the time about how important it is for you in your life to surround yourself with people that you know are serious-minded about the things of the Lord, people that are concerned with your betterment, people that want what is best for you, people that want spiritual things for you and are cautious and careful for you. Saul doesn't care about David in the least, and he's very manipulative here. Saul wants David dead and gone, yet he's going to devise a way to have someone else do his dirty work. Well, I threw a spear at him and I can't get him. But he's going to manipulate this scenario and have David go courageously against the Philistines, hoping that the Philistines will kill him. That's what Saul's goal is. If you haven't seen that in verse 17, that's what Saul's goal is. I'm going to set a trap for him. I'm going to tempt him and lure him, because I know David's brave, and I know David's courageous, and I know David cares about the things of the Lord. And by telling him that this is the Lord's battle, and by offering him this reward, I'm going to lure him into fighting the Philistines, hoping that they'll kill him, hoping that the Philistines will kill him. Now notice the contrast in David. Look at verse 18. It's a total different contrast from Saul. David said unto Saul, "Who am I, and what is my life, or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" Notice how humble David is. What do you and I know by this point? You and I by this point know that David is beloved in Israel. People love him, right? Saul's servants love him. Jonathan loves him. The women of Israel are singing and dancing in his honor. Israel loves David, and yet he has a humble heart. And he's not going to use that as his advantage and lord that over King Saul, does he? He presents himself humbly. He presents himself as a servant. Who am I? What is my life or my father's family? He takes a low place there. When offered the king's daughter, when offered the hand of the king's daughter, David humbly asked the question, "Who am I?" And now you're again presented with the contrast in verse number 19, because now let's look at how Saul responds to that. "But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel the Maholathite to wife." Notice again Saul at work there. It's time. He's promised her to David. It's time to give her to David. And yet Saul gives her to someone else. Now it's apparent that there is an attempt here to make David jealous and hopefully get David to lash out in anger. Just like Saul did, right? David doesn't do that. You and I would look at this and think that maybe David would be justified to do that. Saul responded in jealousy. Saul lashed out in anger. Well, how would you feel if the woman that you were promised, her father gives her to someone else? Would you be tempted to jealousy? Would you be prompted perhaps to lash out in anger? David is a better man than Saul is. Okay? David is a better man than Saul is. And David does not respond the way that David does not respond the way that Saul does. Now, number 2, let's look at Saul setting the trap. Number 1, Saul plans the trap. But number 2, Saul sets the trap. Let's start with verse 20. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. We learn that Saul has another daughter, a daughter named Michal. And she loves David. Now, in fairness, I think all the single women in Israel probably love David. His praises have been sung, and I'm sure there would have been many a woman in Israel that would have been honored to marry the giant slayer, right? But the king's daughter, the Bible says that she loved David, and they report that back to Saul. And when Saul sees particularly that his daughter is fond of David, he likes that idea. Why? It's not because Saul's real keen on having his daughter married to David. He likes the idea because he thinks he can use it to his advantage. Verse number 21, it says, and Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him. This is a really weird dynamic. If I told one of my daughters, I want you to marry this guy, and my whole intent behind that was evil, and not because I cared about their relationship, and not because, of any of those good things, but my plan the whole time was to use my daughter to get back at David. Saul's weird now. This is someone who obviously, it's clear the Lord has abandoned him. That this guy, he never thought spiritually before, but it honestly doesn't really take even spirituality to love your own kids, to love your own family the way maybe that you ought to. But Saul's not even, he's promising this daughter, and to make David mad, he gives her to somebody else. And then he finds out that another daughter's really fond of David and loves him, and, well, I'll use her. What do you mean I'll use her? You'll use your own daughter? That is so weird, right? For a dad to talk that way about his daughter. But that is his plan. Verse 21, he said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain. Well, I'll give you one of them. I'll give you one of my daughters, and you'll be my son-in-law. And this is his plot. He is going to use his daughter to lure David into his plan with the Philistines. Verse 22, it says that Saul commanded his servants, saying, commune with David secretly, and say, behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. Saul gets his servants together, and hey, listen, I want you to go talk to David. And don't make a big deal out of this. Go to him quietly, go to him secretly, but I want you to convince him that all that animosity, All that stuff, all that's in the past. He says there in verse 22, commune with him and say, behold, the king hath delight in thee. You and I both know that's not true. You and I know that that Saul doesn't delight in David. But you guys pretend like everything's fine. Tell him I love him. Tell him we're going to put all this stuff behind us. This is going to be good. I'm going to give you my daughter. You're going to be my son-in-law. And they go and they'll tell David, King Saul, he's really turned a corner. He flew off the handle, right? He lost control there for a bit. He wasn't thinking right, but he's ready to come through on his promise. He's ready to put all that stuff in the past. Let bygones be bygones. He's going to give you his daughter. You're going to be the king's son-in-law, just like he had always promised. Verse 23, it says, and Saul's servants spake those words in the ears of David. And David said, seemeth it to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? When David's approached with the information, David immediately considers how big a deal it is. Why is it a big deal? It's a big deal because now it's the real thing. We're not just speaking hypothetically. This is like the real thing. He's going to give his daughter to be married to David. But unfortunately, David's from a poor family. Now, in the old days, they had a thing called a dowry. We don't really have that in our culture, but a dowry was something that would be paid to a bride's family in exchange for the bride. If you wanted to marry someone, the fathers or the families would work out details, and I will give my daughter to your son, to your family, and in exchange, a dowry would be paid. Now, whatever that is, whether it's in money, whether it's in goods, whether it's in livestock, cattle, animals, whatever it may have been, the more prestigious the bride and the more prestigious the bride's family, the higher the dowry. Well, you don't get any more prestigious than the king of Israel, right? You would be talking about the highest dowry, the highest price that he could pay. David knows that surely he's not going to be able to afford anything like that. David is not going to be able to afford the price of a king's daughter. So, verse 24, the servants of Saul told him, saying, on this manner David spake. Well, they come back to Saul with that. Hey, it's all great and all, Saul, but he knows he's from a poor family. He's worried about being able to pay the expected price. Verse 25, Saul said, well, thus shall you say to David, the king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Well, you go tell David, no. No dowry is necessary. I don't want money. I don't want goods. I don't want cattle. I don't want anything from your family. Here's my asking price. I want 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And again, we see in this verse Saul's motive. Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Saul wants David dead. Now, I won't get into all the details of what Saul is asking David to do here, but you can assume that to acquire what is being asked, David has to kill 100 Philistines. He's prodding David. Saul is trying to goad him into a dangerous situation. Saul is trying to goad David into a battle, into a personal attack to where he goes and tries to kill 100 Philistines, assuming that David will be killed if he attempts this. You see, in Saul's mind, maybe David got lucky, right? A stone and a sling, and he's a good shot maybe, and he killed that giant, but there's no way that he could kill 100 Philistines, right? There's no way. You wouldn't think that. And his plan is this: I'll let you marry my daughter, and you don't have to pay for it with money. You don't have to pay for it in goods, and your family doesn't have to come up with a dowry. I want 100 foreskins of the Philistines. I want evidence that you've killed. I want evidence of the deaths of 100 Philistines, assuming there's no way they'll kill him. David won't make it out of this alive. Verse 26, and when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and all the days were not expired. So the trap is set. Saul has tried to use David's courage and loyalty and spirituality against him. He has baited him by using his own daughter. How would you like to be Saul's daughter right about now? Like, Dad is using her to lure the man she loves to death. There's no way that Saul pictures any other option here than this results in David dying. All right? So the trap is set. Now, thirdly, let's look at David's courageous success. Because verse 27 says, wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale, or we would say tally, to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. David ends up accounting for twice as much as was required. Twice what was asked for. There's no way Saul saw this coming, right? If I ask for 100, there's no way they'll kill him. Maybe he gets a couple, but Saul pictures this ending with David dying. And yet the very opposite of that is what happens. Not only is David courageously successful, he's twice as much. He returns twice as much as King Saul was going to require for his daughter's hand. Now, obviously at the end of verse 27, what do you do now? Saul gave him, Michal, his daughter to wife. And I'm sure he did it spitefully and bitterly. There's not an ounce of love in this story that Saul has for David. He has manipulated David's courage and bravery and faithfulness. He has used his daughters, multiple daughters, as pawns, as tools to manipulate David. Saul, the Bible tells us, the Lord always told his followers, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves, right? You don't be deceptive. You don't be manipulative. But you be snake-like in your wisdom, because there's wolves out there in sheep's clothing. And you have to be cautious and careful that these kind of people, the world will use you. The world would use you. They would try to turn your own loyalties and faithfulness and spirituality even against you. You have to be cautious. You need to know that those that you allow to influence you and talk you into things have your best interest at heart, have spiritual, real, good intentions for you. If you are surrounded by people that are in it for themselves, if your relationships are with people that only care about how they come out in the wash, you're going to get talked into doing a bunch of nonsense and a bunch of silliness and a bunch of foolishness. Saul believes that he's done that to David. And yet it's evident that the Lord is with David, because David, what does he do? He comes back successful twice as much. And that actually scares Saul to death. It says in verse 28, and Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. The more it becomes evident that God is with David, the more Saul fears him. Saul knows that the Lord has rejected him. And every time David shows up, it is evident, it is written all over the scene, God is with this young man. The Lord is with him. And that scares him. You know, as believers, as people, if you're spiritual minded, the idea that the Lord is with someone, that shouldn't scare you off from them. That should ingrain them to you. It's like Jonathan and David, right? He loved him as it was his own soul. There was a bond of friendship there, so much so that the Bible says they had a covenant together. Their relationship was built on something whole and pure. But Saul's relationship with David, it's built on distrust and jealousy. And every time that David does something right, and every time that David does something spiritual, and it becomes evident that God is with David, Saul gets further away. Okay? If you get closer to the Lord, and it drives people further away from you, listen, that's okay. Those may not have been the best of friends that you wanted anyway. Okay, so think about that. If you make a commitment to be faithful and draw close to the Lord, and you want to serve the Lord, and the more faithful you try to become, the more it pushes people away. Be cautious of those kind of people, okay? Just practical thinking here. If you getting closer to the Lord makes someone your enemy, keep those things in mind. Think about the spiral that Saul is in right now. He has someone who's courageous, willing, loyal, and honorable, humble, good-spirited, and someone whom time and time again the Bible says has behaved himself wisely. And how does Saul see him? What does verse 29 say? Became David's enemy continually. All of those things, all of those good character qualities in David. And what does the Bible say about Saul? He views David as an enemy. Not as a captain in his army, not as a son-in-law who's committed to right, committed to faithfulness, committed to spiritual things. He sees him as an enemy. And you wouldn't think that the king of Israel should look at a man like David as his enemy, but that is how Saul looks at David. Verse 30, then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass, after they went forth, that David, again, this is the third time in this chapter, it says that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. Saul's plan completely backfired. Not only was he not able to see David killed, but David continues to rise in esteem and honor among all Israel. What a testimony for doing the right thing all the time, right? And Saul is pitiful in this chapter, right? He's tried to connive and manipulate, and through means of deceit, try to work things his own way. In his jealousy over David, he wanted nothing more than to see David killed, and did all that he could to control the situation to make that happen. And what happened? David comes out not only on top, but more loved than he was before. He behaved himself wisely this entire time. So chapter 18 really, really labels for us and really is descriptive of the two different kinds of character in Saul and in David. 3 times we've seen the phrase about David behaving himself wisely, and yet Saul, here's a guy that's spiraling out of control. He's doing what he can to have people killed, to have like an honorable man killed. He's using his own daughters for that. Here's a guy that he's lost it. And in jealousy and in anger, he's starting to do things that are just nonsense. It's terrible things. Such to the point, and we don't have time to get to it tonight, but we'll preface it by looking at chapter 19, verse 1. It says, "And Saul spake to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David." There's no manipulating, and there's no hiding intentions now, is there? When chapter 19 opens up, Saul's just kind of out front with it. He's got to go. He wants David dead. And those things that he tried to manipulate and tried to do under guise of deceit and tried to do it the deceitful way, now it's gotten to the point where I don't care who knows it. David's got to go. And he wants David dead. And he's not done yet trying to make sure that David gets it. I hope you see, and I'll just repeat again, from chapter 18, just the contrast in character between David and Saul. And I hope that you're encouraged to surround yourself by those kinds of people like David, people that are courageous, brave, and loyal in things that are spiritual and they're faithful. And you be on guard and you be cautious about people like Saul, who are manipulative, people that are trying to work things to their own betterment, and they don't care who they use and who they harm along the way. Saul doesn't have any concern for spiritual things, and that's starting to evidence itself now in how he deals with people. And he doesn't care who he hurts. He doesn't care if it's his own family. He's lost control, and he's starting to make really bad decisions. Hey, so model your character after someone like David. Behave wisely. Don't lose control. Don't allow jealousy and anger and envy and those things to control your character. You can make some terrible calls if you let emotion control you like that. All right? Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we're thankful